It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is Sophie Ross, Global CEO of Technology at FTI Consulting. Sophie has more than 20 years of experience in operations in the USA, Europe, and Asia, and specializes in helping clients manage their overall e-discovery and review through predictable pricing models and by simplifying the multi-layers of discovery management. Sophie joined FTI Consulting through its 2008 acquisition of Strategic Discovery, where she served as the Chief Operating Officer and was responsible for data processing, IT and client support, human resources administration, and accounting. Earlier in her career, she was EVP of Global Delivery and Operations at Freeborders, an application outsourcing and software firm. Sophie has served in the Israeli Naval Intelligence, grew up and was schooled in several European countries, and is fluent in 4 languages. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering from Tel Aviv University and an MBA from Harvard Business School. Sophie Ross, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's great to be here with everyone.
Wonderful to have you here. And we talked several months ago. We both have very busy schedules. And so I'm glad on this last day of the quarter in September, we've had a chance to chat. This will, of course, will be coming out a little bit later. But let's start at the beginning. I know that you went to school in Israel and would love to hear a little bit about your early life. Tell us where you grew up and what that early family life was like.
So would love to. So I was born in Israel. I grew up in different countries. My father and my parents moved every few years. My father was a diplomat.
All right.
So
were they both Israeli or were they immigrants to Israel originally?
So my dad was from Israel. My mother is from Europe, from Portugal and France. So
cool.
Combination.
Yeah.
And then I ended up living in different countries in Europe, growing up. Did my baccalaureate in Paris, and then went back to Israel for the military service and for my undergrad.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the journey. I think what was interesting during those days, pre-internet, as a child, moving every 3 years from countries to different languages, different school systems. Is really that notion of, we talk a lot about diversity today. We talk a lot about different perspectives. I think I was experiencing that at a very early age. And I think that's maybe what shapes you as an individual later on. I mean, the ability to adapt, the ability to look at things from different angles, just kind of fast forwarding to where we are today.
Yeah. Were you an only child, brothers and sisters growing up?
I have 2 brothers. I'm the oldest.
2 brothers. Wow. So you were all moving around. That's
yes.
Incredible. And languages learned along the way?
Yeah. I mean, several languages. Obviously, mother tongue is Hebrew and French, and then other languages with English, Italian, a little bit of German, And I lived in countries such as Romania, Greece, Belgium and France. So definitely different systems, different languages.
And your dad, I assume, was at the Israeli mission at each of those locations. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of what moved you around, right? Yeah. And how was that? I mean, obviously you had to switch schools a lot, kind of hard to keep friends. Did it make you kind of more cohesive as a family unit? Did you keep in touch with friends that you made along the way? Was that difficult for you in some ways?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question, especially, given that I'm also a parent. So you have a different perspective later on
Yeah.
when you look at it and you realize first how much my parents were involved and made sure that we were as comfortable and prepared as possible before
Right.
we arrived to a new place. But yes, I mean, you have to make new friends. Typically, again, this is pre-internet, so you really can only keep in touch very closely with maybe two friends when you leave.
Right.
I mean, later on in life, high school, that's a little bit easier, but especially when you're younger and have pen pals during those days.
Yeah.
But then, you learn how to adapt, how to fit, how to be different, that kind of combination. Right. I feel fortunate. I made some good friends along the way, learned quite a bit, and always try to take that kind of positive attitude of, it's okay to be different, and really kind of learning from one place and taking it to the next. So, I feel like, so from that perspective, it was a great experience. I think as a child, every time you come to a new school and you have, even just take math as an example, every system, every country has a different pace. So sometimes you're ahead and sometimes you're behind. So you always have to kind of fill that gap. But yeah, no, I think, it did require a lot of hard work. So, it wasn't like you could just coast. That's for sure. You had to make it happen. But I feel very fortunate in that way.
Were you in private schools? Did the embassy have schools that you attended? Did you attend public schools, or was it kind of a mixed match depending on where you were?
So it was mixed, and I was in some schools. My brothers were in other schools. We had different preferences,
right,
as well.
Sure.
So it was interesting in that way. Several of the schools were international schools, so that at least I can most of the time study in either English or French, or German, or, in the early days in Romania, I was in German. So, kind of some combination. So most of the time it was international, which means that you actually get to meet, kids from different places.
Yeah. Into the diversity of it. Were you a good student?
So it's interesting also when you ask this, and as a parent, what does it mean to be a good student?
What does that mean?
So today's world, and what actually makes one successful. So what I will say is I gravitated a lot towards math and the sciences because it was a universal language. That was kind of that constant across all these places and locations. With some of the other elements changing, like history in one place was different than geography, et cetera. So you can imagine. So I think, just looking at, I feel like I was really fortunate, in that way that I got to experience those different, topics in those different, locations and bring that context into the new place. So in some ways I was quite, I had a different perspective in class, I will say.
I guess with the sciences and maths, there was probably a lot more similarity, right?
Correct.
As you went across different locations. Had you been, I'm sure you studied languages as well, but, history and a lot of the social sciences would really have probably much of a different curriculum depending on where you learned it.
Yeah, totally different, which was obviously very interesting and informative, but it wasn't consistent, or there wasn't a consistent evolution from one to the other.
What about outside of school? Were there activities that you pursued, sports, theater, music, things that you enjoyed beyond your studies?
Yeah, so loved playing the piano when I was, all along until my baccalaureate. Didn't get as much the opportunity to play after, when I was in college and all that. But music is a big piece. It's still a big piece in our family. One of my sons is a musician, so I love walking into the house and hearing the music every day. And then art and painting. I mean, that's one thing that I hope to pick up again when I retire. Who knows when? But yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And so you returned to Israel for your undergrad and studied engineering, from what I gather. Was that kind of always part of your plan, or did just Dad's assignment lead you back there, or did you kind of feel a calling to return to Israel and do your university studies there, at least the first part of it?
Yeah, so that's also a really good question. So despite the fact that I didn't grow up there from 2 to 18, basically, I had to do the military service regardless, since my father was
to keep your nationality.
So, so that was mandatory. I went back for that.
And you did that before university,
yes,
is that
typically,
right? Is that
typically you do that at 18.
You do that after high school.
Right after high school. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I was gravitating towards the sciences, and in Israel, the sciences are quite strong. So when I was looking at, what schools to go to and some of the options, I was either going to go and focus in mathematics or engineering, et cetera, and then ended up picking engineering. I suppose it seemed more practical at the time.
Right. Well, it probably came easier for you too, right? Given your interest in maths and sciences earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
And was it a 4-year degree, a 2-year degree? How did they?
Yeah, it's a 4-year degree. And the one thing I will tell you, sitting there, as a first-year student, we were only 4 women. 4 women that entire first year. That I still remember. So, today it's different, and it's good that it's different. But it was interesting in that way.
Right. And then went to work right away coming out of Tel Aviv University. I know you went on to Harvard and got your MBA. Were those back to back, or was there some work in between?
Yeah. So there was work in between. There was also work during. So the entire time that I was at university as well, I worked, there was a consulting firm, local consulting firm that I worked for during those times. And then after engineering school, I worked for a company by the name of Cytext that then was bought by HP. So, in those days, you had big plotters and then the first individual printer with a PS2. I was product manager for that. And the company, like I said, was bought by HP, and then some of the printing lines and printers that HP has in technology that comes from there. So I did work in between, and then I suppose along the way, given that I, experienced those different countries, different places, I thought about going to the U.S. and ending up here in the U.S. and having an experience here, and through the MBA, that was a good way to get started here.
So how many years in between from the time you got your engineering degree before you went back for your MBA?
I think it was about 3 years.
About 3 years. So a couple of jobs in between there. Yeah, great. When did you first start managing people?
I think early on, even in the military,
Oh, of course.
Yes.
Yeah,
So I suppose early on in that way. And I think, you evolve your style with time. And
what did you learn in those early years?
Well, here's the interesting thing. So the one thing about the military in Israel is that everybody has to go to the military. So you end up meeting and working and interacting with individuals that potentially you would have never met in the norm. Because even in the U.S., when people go to college, it's almost there's a selection process. There's a whole and you really get to learn how to work together, interact, motivate, collaborate with individuals that may be quite different and have different kind of goals and things like that. So I will say that piece of it I took with me quite a long way. So I've learned quite a bit in that context. Like I think from the early days, I always take the positive approach, meaning that I think the best way to manage a team or manage individuals is really understanding what they're trying to achieve, how that fits with what we're trying to achieve, and through motivation. The goals need to be aligned. It needs to be exciting at the same time challenging. We all have to be accountable too. And give the tools to the individuals. And it's different tools depending on the levels, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. To make it happen. And when there's an issue, help solve it. So that kind of mindset you can apply differently depending on whether you're managing an executive team or managing a small project team, but the same kind of concepts along the way.
Yeah. Makes good sense. Following your MBA at Harvard, did you go back into engineering jobs or right into consulting? Tell us a little bit about your career path post your MBA.
Yeah, interesting. So, I wanted to try something different. I worked for the Boston Consulting Group, then decided that I was interested in something entrepreneurial. So worked for Freeborders that was bought by Symbio. With Freeborders, this was a company that was doing application outsourcing. We had over 500 folks in places like China, US, and Europe. Venture backed. So that was kind of that entrepreneurial experience. Yeah. And then after that, I stumbled into the current industry and joined Strategic Discovery as chief operating officers. And we were three executives, growing and running the company. And eventually, we ended up selling Strategic Discovery to FTI Consulting. So that's how I ended up here.
Okay, God. Yeah. So that's how you ended up there. All right. Yeah. So you've pretty much been in the same place for over 25 years.
Oh, I would. Well, no, not exactly.
about 15 years. Yes. So I got my math wrong there. No, I apologize, Sophie.
No, that's good. That's good.
So they were purchased fairly early on after you joined? Or did it come, later on after you were at Strategic Discovery?
Around a couple of years or so.
Yeah, a couple of years into it. Yeah. Got it. And how has the business transformed during that time? Have you pretty much operated the same practice in that job, or is it, and now with FTI, a much different role given what you were doing before with Strategic Discovery?
It's definitely evolved. It's evolved for a couple of reasons. First of all, my career has evolved, and also our industry has evolved. So, when you look at the work that we did at the time, was really focused on what we call e-discovery. It's really a lot of it was analysis of emails, sometimes paper documents for the discovery process, right? Whether it's litigation, investigation, et cetera. You fast forward to today, we actually work with clients. We help clients manage their data in the context of compliance and risk. So that includes e-discovery, but it includes information governance, privacy, security. It includes compliance, risk, contract analysis. So it's much wider. And also the type of work that we do involves antitrust, investigation, litigation, pre-post M&A. So it is a little bit more, much wider. And you can imagine the type of data we're definitely past the email stage with collaboration platforms.
Social media,
social media and collaboration platforms being in the forefront. So first of all, the industry has changed. The business today is also much more global. So that's another piece of it. We have locations in India, Dubai, all over Asia, like, China, Japan, Singapore, and Australia, Brazil, Canada, all the Americas, and in Europe and Ireland, Spain, France, Germany, UK. So it's a whole different footprint than a few years ago. And then from a career perspective, I joined here. I was responsible for the integration. And then try to figure, how do I fit now in this larger organization? And decided to kind of put a business plan together, suggested an area for us to set up and invest, and grew that area for FTI, built that business, then was also responsible for the Western region, and then took on as the CEO of FTI Technology around 4 or 5 years ago.
Right. Now, so are you overseeing all those global operations, all those countries you mentioned? You have offices in those locations? Fantastic. How big is your group?
So, so we have, I would say around 550 people globally that work full time. We have, kind of a range between 600 to 800 employees that work, also employees of FTI, but then they work as needed depending on the projects. So that combination across that footprint.
Yeah, fantastic. And when we spoke a couple of months ago, one of the things I was so impressed about is how diverse your management team is. Tell us a little bit about how you got there.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's a combination of individuals that started their careers at FTI and are now in the management team, individuals that I knew from the industry, And even one of my partners from Strategic Discovery who came back. So that was,
nice.
He left and then came back, which was really exciting. Yeah. And then a few folks that we hired, we knew that they were very successful. So, it takes a while to put a management team together. I feel very fortunate. We have a really strong management team, and there's a combination of, again, the diverse perspectives, the skill sets. Some are focused more on the marketing and sales, other on our services and technology, other on the consulting. So they have those different areas of expertise, and they really give some interesting perspectives. I also have management that's, head of Asia, head of EMEA, so kind of the global aspect as well. So I do think that, in order to be able to really run a business well, you have to make sure that you have as best of a management team as you can. Obviously, it's sometimes easier said than done, but I will say that I feel fortunate in that way.
Yeah. You'd mentioned back at Tel Aviv University, you were one of only 4 or 5 engineering students. Did you have mentors along the way? Were there folks that, helped to guide you in your career path and, give you opportunities as you grew? Or, were you kind of cutting a trail, more trailblazing on your own?
So I think it's a combination. I don't know if it's always individual. Sometimes it's the experiences, like some that I mentioned earlier, just the ability to come to a new place, figure out the environment and try to make a difference. I think that piece of it is something that I had to do many times as a child in that context, and then took that with me. Right. So I think that's one piece. Yeah. Along the way, later on, actually, when I got to the U.S., there are 2 individuals who served as my mentors. One I work with in the context of the venture capital setting, and he was in venture capital. He now retired since, but was very involved with a lot of startups and on various boards. He has been a great mentor along the way, giving advice in different contexts. So I really think that was one of my strongest mentorship relationships. And then I have an ex-colleague. He also switched industries since, but earlier on, when I was in this industry, was really a strong mentor. And I will also say he was very much, he also supported the advancement of women. So I think that was part of that as well. So I'm very fortunate to have had, to have worked with him, and then have had him as a mentor.
Yeah, awesome. Have you been mentoring others as well? Have you found that to be something that's been important in terms of, kind of developing maybe just not people inside the organization, but also outside as well?
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned, the 2 mentors I had were actually male. And, when I, was able to start helping others, I thought that it would be very, very important. I think, so everything from earlier on, women that were on my team, or, every year, some of them now are quite senior, which is very nice to see. And that is something that I've always been very committed to. And I think it's really important. And I think there are different roles of mentors. There's some mentors that can really help you, guide you along the way on a more regular basis. There are mentors that really can be sounding boards in your industry. And so we have like group of women that I know from the industry that kind of meet and talk about advancing also our cause in the industry. So I think it's that kind of combination. And then you have advocates. It's important. Sometimes it's not necessarily someone that is as close or that you speak with as often, but that knows you well enough, respects the work that you do. It can be your advocate. It can be around the table when people are talking about promotion. It can be, opening doors, introducing you to individuals. I think that is important as well. So I think there are different forms. And I try to play that role in different ways for folks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you've grown up in both a discipline and an industry that's been fairly male focused over the years, right? Engineering, of course, and of course consulting as well. Although I think that's changed probably more rapidly than engineering has. What have you seen kind of in differences as it relates to leadership between the genders? Is it that different still today, or do you think that we've kind of come to a point now where there is just so much more of the blindness, I guess, to gender is the best way to say it, in terms of how both you lead as well as develop others?
Yeah, look, that's a good question. I will say that maybe again, and it's going back to the early days, maybe because I was always used to not necessarily having the nationality from the particular country or fully fitting. Right. I never thought about it too much until later on when it became more of a topic, and more of a focus in our society, I would say. I always, the way I look at it when you sit around a table, and it doesn't matter if you're, with your project team around the table or you're in an executive table, really thinking about what impact I could make, right? So I think that was always an impact to the business, impact to the people, impact, et cetera. So not necessarily thinking about the difference in style. So that's kind of the mindset that I start with. But then at the same time, I do think that people have different, personal styles. It's not always a gender-based difference, but there are different personal styles. And we all bring different experiences, to the table. I mean, the one thing that I really, really insist on and with our teams along the way, our company, et cetera, is for people to have the equal opportunity to express that around the table. Because I think that's really important. I think you have to have a culture of collaboration, a culture where we can hear new ideas. You never know where the best idea is going to come from. That's the reality.
That's right.
And I think that needs to be, everything again from, the teamwork that we do for clients all the way to all the other types of initiatives and committees and management teams that we have in the company. So it's less of a style as much as I think the important part is to have that kind of atmosphere and openness, so that we can capture all that and people can really express themselves. There may be a little bit of a difference in that, we all have to manage, things outside work in various ways. So the one thing that I tell, people from an advice perspective is look at your career in periods of 3 years at a time. Every 3 years, your priorities change, the business changes, the
life situation
everything changes. So, think, okay, here, the next 3 years, what are, my career goals? How do I fit it? What are my personal goals? And, you just kind of, as long as you feel like you're advancing in some way, in every one of those categories, but it doesn't have to be the same pace all the time. And I think that's kind of the constant tweaking that can lead you there. You can have a North Star, you can have eventually, but I say that you can accomplish a lot during your lifetime in your career, but you can't accomplish it all at the same time. So you just have to figure out, what you're focused on when. It doesn't mean all either or, but it means that, the percentages and the attention may be a little bit different.
Yeah. I heard it recently said that a lot of CEOs, particularly those that maybe, a decade or so or a generation or so older than you, are a little bit, are more comfortable with having their questions answered than their answers questioned. And sometimes, as we know, the people that don't speak up sometimes have some of the best ideas. How do you kind of create that environment where people, don't have that fear of, either looking foolish or maybe being called out because it's a dumb question or what have you, even at the executive level?
Yeah, look, that's, that again is really important. I think there's several things that one needs to make sure happen. First of all, as a manager, as a CEO, you need to try to be as transparent as possible. Something sometimes like an HR matter may not be something you can share, but really transparent about the goals, what we're trying to reach, all of that. So that first people have the same context, really understand where we're headed, what we're trying to accomplish. So, we're kind of speaking the same language. Then I think, as we set those goals, the strategies, the initiatives, it's very important to get the input. Because we're not in a world where you can just dictate, here's what we want to do, and that's it. I mean, you really want to make sure that there is buy-in. We thought about the different aspects. So I think that process alone is important, because then once you have that exercise and, we put that all together and we assess all that and individuals have had the opportunity to provide the input, then there's much more buy-in and it's much easier to get those things done.
Wow. So that's terrific. Great input. One of the things that, we see so often in organizations is that, some of that information that comes from others can be stifled just because there's an intimidation around. Do you think a CEO needs to be vulnerable? And if so, how do you best do that in an organization while still maintaining, authority and leadership?
Yeah. So especially I think in today's world, it's not like in the past potentially where, there was a CEO, there was a very formal way of communicating and there was that big separation. You really need to be involved. And I think it is important to have a vulnerable side. I mean, you also have to have a strong side, right? Because you have to lead and you have to show that we have confidence and we're
it's a balance, right? It's a tough balance to strike. Yeah.
But the vulnerable side is also important, and it's important in two ways. First of all, the compassion piece of it, the understanding, especially, I mean, I can only assume here with many CEOs during the COVID time, you have to be able to be part of that, and also sit in the seat of every employee. So that vulnerable piece of it. Yeah. The other piece of it, which relates to the questioning, if some moves were not the right moves or we have to tweak, it's okay to say, look, we thought, this and that, and now we're tweaking. We looked at this, we have more input, and we're going a little bit in a different direction. And I think in the end, one gets even more respect, because no one is perfect. Right. And I think we're all better if we're able, we're able to do that. And I think a CEO and a leader is better if that individual is able to get the input from the management team, but really from all individuals, because a lot of the times the best ideas come from, employees that
people
interact directly.
Lines.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Terrific. Great. Well, a couple other questions. I know we're almost out of time, but, FTI Consulting has been growing a lot. Your group has been growing. How do you go about, making bets on the people you invest in and hire? What do you look for?
So it's interesting. So obviously people always think skill set, or capabilities. And obviously, you have to have, the requirements typically, but it's really about, I think and this goes back to, what constitutes a good student and will good students be successful. So it all relates together. So what I want to say is that, you have to think about, will this individual fit in our culture? Will they collaborate? Will they be able to bring their experiences, their skill sets, and thrive here? Because that's really important. Yeah. The other piece of it is, we put initiatives in place, we put goals, etc. Is that individual either entrepreneurial, takes initiative, will be able to run with it, and that's in all levels. Based on the particular role. That's the other piece of it. And then the third piece, I think that's really important is, you kind of get a sense, when you hear about people's experiences, and what led them to here, are they excited about this? Is this something that they're really going to go for? So I think these three areas, assuming that everything else, is there, from the skill set and all that. But I think these are important because the reality is we all learn very quickly in today's world.
Right.
And even the technical areas.
Yeah.
Your job today is not going to be the same 24 months from now.
That's right.
We bring in new tools, new technologies. So it needs to be a person that's adaptable. I think that's important, because, and that's eager to continue learning. Because I think that's the other piece as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure, Sophie, by the time that you interview folks, they've gone through a number of other interviews. There have been folks that have done the qualifications testing. There's been some qualifications checking, maybe some assessment testing to see cultural fit and so forth. But when you finally have that conversation and you have maybe 35, 40 minutes, and it's so hard, of course, to get at a deep conversation. You rely a lot on others, right? And, in my recruiting practice, I do the same thing. I've got staff that does a lot of the original screening. We go through a lot of background checks. By the time I talk to them, I know that they've got the qualifications and so forth, but I always focus in on a few things that are specific really to the company. What are the kind of questions that you ask? What's important for you to know after someone comes to you after several rounds of interviews and they're getting close to that job?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So there are kind of, I would say, three areas that I focus on, assuming and after, making sure that they understand, for example, FTI Technologies, a strategy, where we're headed,
right.
This role. My question to them is, how do they see that they will be able to make an impact here? What is it that they believe they can bring and really kind of make happen? The second piece of it is, just on a personal level, if you fast forward, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, where do they see themselves in their career, and specifically within FTI?
Right.
And then the last piece of it is really more around, managing people, driving people, like where have they contributed from a cultural perspective, from a people perspective, and how do they see that component of impact? If I haven't heard that in one of the answers, the people aspect is really important, and their kind of philosophy on that side. So I would say those three aspects.
Yeah, awesome. Well, you've been very, very generous. Thank you so much for your time. We always have one last question we always ask. Most of our listeners, let's say, are, kind of late 20s to mid 30s, folks that are mid-career, they're taking a look around. Maybe they've got aspirations to become a CEO someday. Maybe they're talking about maybe doing something entrepreneurial. What kind of career and life advice would you give to someone who maybe has their eyes focused on, getting into the corner office themselves someday?
Well, first of all, the interesting thing that I don't know if the corner office is a corner office anymore. It's a little bit different.
Very true. Very true. So it is the name of our podcast, though, Sophie.
I know, but it's kind of funny because I think the shape is changing. Maybe, it's kind of more a bespoke way. I don't know exactly. But
right.
So I think that piece. But I think really I would say, look for something that you're very passionate about. Again, it's the notion of leading and whether it's a CEO or as an executive, it's again, that same impact. What impact do you want to make, whether it's to the business, to the people, to the industry? How do you want to shape it? If you have that kind of notion, and how you may want to get there, I think the rest, the other pieces really fall into place. And the one thing I would say, think about, what are your strengths today? It could be more the technical aspect. It could be more the sales aspect or the people aspect. And what areas do you want to strengthen? So that you can have, nobody has everything to the same extent, but you do want to gather along the way those different aspects of management and the ability to then be able to take that business and the people to the next level. Think about what you want to complement in the next couple of years.
Awesome. Sophie Ross, Global CEO of Technology at FTI Consulting. Thank you so very much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Than't you. It was great to speak to you, and looking forward to maybe meeting in person one day. Thanks. Take care.
All the best.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brandt, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.